you have like the Hafs or you have the Warsh, right? You have readings that read different, but all scholars, even Muslim scholars, will say, well, the meaning is retained. You have the same meaning. So it's the same thing when you look at the New Testament.
I think there's a very big difference between authenticated hadith going right the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with his own lips telling us that he told Gabriel to recite it in a different way and recite it in a different way, so it would accommodate the dialectical differences of the Arabian Peninsula. It's very different to say that somehow that is similar to manuscripts that were clearly lost, that don't exist in the original form, where there is no oral tradition that quotes the Bible verbatim, letter for letter, word for word, which we do have in the Quran. So I think that comparison, quite frankly, it doesn't actually match.
And also, just the example that Louis also gave from the Quran about they fought and they're killed, they're complementary to one another, whereas the example from Revelations like 666 and 616, these are contradictions.
Scholars use the word illusion as they look at maybe a church father's work, right? Anyone after the apostles, and they see whether it's referencing one of the New Testament writings that we know of today. And so the word doesn't have to be how do you say, let's just say you have some articles, right? And you have some writings that have like words that are non-authorist. So basically, when you have a writing, textual scholars don't say you have to have word for word in the Greek, each manuscript being the same, because all textual scholars acknowledge that you don't have any single manuscript, whether it's the New Testament or whether it's in the Quran, that reads word for word. You have like the Hafs or you have the Warsh, right? You have readings that read different, but all scholars, even Muslim scholars, will say, well, the meaning is retained. You have the same meaning. So it's the same thing when you look at the New Testament. You say, textual scholars say, hey, when you have this these manuscripts in this reading, is it saying the same thing? Yes. And so they know that even though one manuscript may differ in a syntax from a different manuscript, the saying is still the same, the sentence is still the same, the syntax is still the same. And so they note that a church father is making reference to a specific quote, and they can trace that quote back to one of the New Testament writings. So when I say allusions, or when scholars speak of the word allusions, they're saying, can we trace this saying, this syntax, back to a work written or found in the New Testament? And so that's what I mean by the word allusions. It's the same thing we have in the New Testament. You find it with in Islam in regard to the Quran, etc.
Okay, Louis, I'd like to actually quickly correct you on the Quran part, because I think there's a very big difference between authenticated hadith going right the way back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, with his own lips telling us that he told Gabriel to recite it in a different way and recite it in a different way, so it would accommodate the dialectical differences of the Arabian Peninsula. And it's very different. It's very different to say that somehow that is similar to manuscripts that were clearly lost, that don't exist in the original form, where there is no oral tradition that quotes the Bible verbatim, letter for letter, word for word, which we do have in the Quran. So I think that comparison, quite frankly, it doesn't actually match. But so what you're basically saying is that textual critics basically say that there doesn't have to be a word for word quotation, but so that you would agree then it becomes down to the person who's actually looking at that quotation, and it can become somewhat subjective of whether that is a quotation or it's something similar. Would you agree to that, Louis?
Absolutely not. No. So what I'm saying is it's a direct parallel what you have in Islam, because I'm going to ask you a question. Are you saying that every single thing we find in the Warsh Quran can be found in the Hafs Quran? You would say no, because I can point to you some of the verses that are completely different. Like there's a difference between being fought and a difference between killed. You would say, well, the meaning of the verse is the same thing. And all I'm saying is that you find different manuscripts, even in Islam, in regard to the Quran, And textual scholars, Quranic textual scholars would say, well, the meaning is retained. It doesn't mean that there's differences. So all I'm saying is that one would be an allusion to the same thing of the other. And in the New Testament, you find the exact same thing. And so what I'm saying in the New Testament,
Louis, let me correct you again on that. When you say that there are dissimilar words in different modes of the Quran that were revealed at the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, your
that's not what I'm saying, Abbas.
Hold
I'm
on a
saying
second.
there's differences in specific words, and those differences are.
Yeah, but Louis, let me explain something to you. When you say that there are differences in words, I've already said to you that from authenticated hadith, from the lips of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, you see, Louis, this is the problem. You don't get this information because this was discovered later. You get this information from our primary sources. You get it from our hadith. You get it from the quotation.
I can look at the Hafs.
Hold on a second, Louis, just relax.
There's a differences in the Arabic word.
Louis, just relax a second. I'm trying to explain that to you. So this is not something that is uncovered later. This is something that was known from the earliest part of the history of Islam, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he asked Angel Gabriel to recite it in another way and in another way, because as you know, there are linguistic differences between tribes at the time of Arabia. So to make it accessible for all of those tribes, okay, there was slight differences in certain terms, Malik and Malik, for example, in the Quran. Now, however, the biblical
Abbas, you're actually answering your own question.
No, but Louis, I haven't finished yet, Louis.
Okay, I'll let you speak, but I'm saying you're answering your own question that you asked.
Louis, the difference between the Bible is that we don't get this from your primary sources. In fact, this is uncovered later, much later.
Ashhadu.
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 Ashhadu la ilaha illallah.
Ashhadu.
Ashhadu la ilaha illallah wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu.
And we're told that the person who accepts Islam, all of their good deeds are also not shared, but equally given to those who support it and given the dawah. So there are numerous ways to support the dawah. You can do that via PayPal, you can join our Patreon, or become a YouTube member. All of your money will then be used to spread the word of Islam throughout the world by creating more content, translations that would reach far more people than they would have normally reached just with the English language, but also to help new Muslims that come into the faith that might need books or training or courses. All of this goes towards enhancing the dawah, and we're very, very grateful to all of your help. Jazakallah khair. I hope, inshallah ta'ala, you enjoy the video. Do remember to like it and to recommend it to your brothers and sisters. Later. And it's uncovered later because there are investigations being made that there are verses that are in the Bibles, for example, of the late 4th century, that don't have entire books in them, or they don't even have the verses in them that we find in later Bibles. So you can't create the parallel.
Abbas,
but Louis, before this conversation, Louis, just one second. So before this conversation diverts into the Quran, we are going to have a Quran stream, and you're more than welcome to come onto that stream. And everyone who's come onto the historicity streams will be invited to come onto the Quran stream, and we will be more than happy to discuss the Quran at that stage.
Can I finish my point?
Hold on, but it's no point going into the Quran discussion at the moment. I've given you the reasons why I believe that the analogy doesn't work. Now, what you've now said to me is that biblical scholars look at quotations, and they don't have to necessarily be direct quotations, verbatim. Okay, as long as the subject matter.
You're getting off track from the actual question. So can I please respond?
What's your direct question? Go on then.
All right. So what you asked me was that I responded to Ijaz's initial assertion that allusions don't qualify, and I asked him the question if he actually thinks that allusions are not a criterion that textual scholars use. Now, you stated that he's off, I think maybe like, handling something maybe in prayer or something, and you gave some reasons possibly why this is not parallel to what we find in Islam or in regard to the Quran. And you said that when we find differences, it has to do with recitation. The whole point is Abbas, is that if you're going to acknowledge that when you have the Hafs and the Warsh and they're saying the same thing, but it maintains the same meaning, it's the exact same thing in regard to the New Testament. When you have a difference in some manuscripts, scholars point that one manuscript may be an allusion to the exact same thing that what we find that a church father is mentioning. And so it doesn't mean that they're referencing something completely different. All they're saying is that you have two different manuscripts, and even though one reading may be different from the other in regard to its syntax, it's still referring to this exact same thing. It's still applying to the same New Testament book, and this is what the church fathers are referencing.
Okay,
so it's not really the same thing, Louis, because when it comes to the different Quranic recitations, they're authorized by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. He taught their companions how to recite the Quran in this particular way. Whereas when it comes to revelations, so when it comes to the textual variants, the author of the book of Revelations obviously didn't write both variations. Either he wrote one or neither. So if you take, for example, 666, that's the most popular reading, but there are some textual traditions that suggest 616. So obviously the author of Book of Revelations didn't write 616 or 666. It's either one of them or neither of them. Whereas when it comes to the example that you gave, king and owner, both recitations the Prophet Muhammad permitted in the recitation of the Quran. So it's not equivalent in that sense. And when it comes to quotations of the church fathers, the reason why like scholars are able to identify that these come from this particular book and that book is because they have some sort of established text, and the quotations from the church fathers, they have zero that consideration when it comes to reconstructing the New Testament. It's like me, for example, if I quote something from the Bible from memory, you have an idea of where I'm quoting from, but obviously my quotation is not going to have any value when it comes to determining what the authors originally wrote. By the way, welcome, Brother Sadat.
Yes, Sadat.
Walaikum salam. Walaikum salam, brothers. How are you?
I don't know if you've been following the discussion at all and whether you want to have any input before Louis comes back in again.
No.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Louis, do you want to come back there at all? Louis? Oh, he's popped off. I think maybe he lost internet connection or whatever. Yeah, I think if Louis turns his camera off, maybe he'll get better bandwidth. I think this comparison between the Quran and the Bible really doesn't work.
Yeah,
it doesn't work because of many levels. Okay, for example, did Jesus authenticate all of these different readings of the Bible? He didn't, did he? No. Did Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, authenticate these different readings that he had? Yes, he did. And in fact, today we have lineage of scholarship that goes right back to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and we have people who've memorized all of these dialects, the different seven aruf of the Quran.
And also, just the example that Louis also gave from the Quran about they fought and they're killed, they're complementary to one another, whereas the example from Revelations like 666 and 616, these are contradictions.
Yeah,
both can't be true.
Right.